I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zayas Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark. Welcome everyone to PF2 Tools Skills in Combat, the episode about skills in combat in Pathfinder 2nd Edition in particular. Unlike most of our GM tools and player tools episodes where we're going to teach you lessons that will apply to many different role-playing games and especially anything in the general Pathfinder Starfinder family, this episode really is not going to help very much if you're not playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's all about the use of skills in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and if you try to do something similar to this in Pathfinder 1st Edition, you're going to quickly find that they take your standard action and then you can't do anything else. So, I do not recommend trying to generalize this episode, and that's the reason Lynn and I decided to call it PF2 Tools.
Plus, it can be useful for both players and GMs.
That's right. So it's not really GM or player tools, because anybody can. In fact, most people will probably think of this as a player tools, but the person who asked for this episode topic, Nicole, was asking for it as a GM to think about if tactics don't explicitly call out using skills. She was wondering about which type of skills could be fun ones to use anyway in combat. So it can really work for either side if you have the kind of skills that you want.
So I think that one of the broad categories of skills that you'll see in combat are the combat maneuvers.
Yeah, that's under athletics. Should we go through the skills alphabetically?
Yeah, I think that makes sense to try to sort out how you might use each skill.
Okay, so let's start with acrobatics. Acrobatics is a skill that you might use in combat, but you don't usually want to unless you're a swashbuckler. Acrobatics is the skill for getting where you need to go when there's a problem with what you need to do to get there. So, are you in a tight area or a narrow surface or uneven ground or something? You've got to balance. In that case, you take an action to balance. Now that action is going to move sort of carefully over the area. It is technically not a stride. It's a move that has a certain amount of distance based on your acrobatics check. You'll know when you need to roll this because either the GM told you it's too narrow or uneven to roll it, or you are the GM and you told yourself, this is too narrow or uneven and I have to roll it.
From the GM perspective, this can come more into play about considering putting terrain in place so that balance would be in play. Particularly
Absolutely.
If you have opponents who are good at acrobatics and may be able to showcase that ability through their increased mobility.
Tumble through is the one that swashbucklers are actually going to roll for you a lot. But that is when there's an enemy in your way to where you want to go. Tumble through is an action that is a stride. But during this stride, at some point you try to move through an enemy with an acrobatics check. If you fail, the movement ends. And you trigger reactions even though it ended. Even if you haven't actually moved, you might get an attack of opportunity. If it succeeds, you move through, but their space counts as difficult terrain. You can also use movement other than strides with tumble through if you have them.
So this is good to consider for any time there's a blockade in movement. And if on either side, the GM or the player, you see your opponents moving to set up a blockade, using a tumble through early on to stop that and to allow your side to have flanks and other tactical advantages can be very useful.
And swashbucklers just tumble through everybody for fun. They make the stalker vigilantes proud from Pathfinder 1st Edition. Then there's the trained acrobatics action. Those last two you can do even if you're untrained. Is it a good idea to tumble through your opponent if you're not trained? I mean, not after a few levels unless you have the Pathfinder Society dedication where you get to add your level to untrained checks. But you can. Maneuver
Go Pathfinder Society and their well-rounded training.
Maneuver and flight you can't even do if you don't have acrobatics. It lets you do weird flying tricks like flying against the wind or hovering in place or reversing direction immediately or flying through gale force winds and all sorts of doing a barrel roll when your allies say, do a barrel roll. And you accidentally fireball them and they say, hey So, maneuver and flight is for that. You'll generally know when you need to do that because there's some kind of issue in flying, or you just want to be doing some random
you're doing
barrel
something
roll.
more complicated than I'm going to move straight at this person flying forward.
Yep.
And if I'm moving up or down, I'm not going to be doing so particularly steeply.
That's right. So squeeze is a rule that a lot of people, like even professional RPG writers who are used to Pathfinder First Edition, do not know what this does. Which I know because I've seen text come in that thinks that it is squeeze from Pathfinder First Edition. So it is not squeeze from Pathfinder First Edition. Squeeze from Pathfinder First Edition is actually sort of a basic rule that's somewhere else in the book about, like, if it's kind of narrow. Actually, no, wait. It's in squeeze. It tells you that it's not squeeze from Pathfinder First Edition. It says this action is for exceptionally small spaces. Most tight spaces are just difficult terrain. You can move through more quickly than this without a check. So in Pathfinder First Edition, if there was even like a little bit of a problem, you took like devastating -4 penalties to attack and AC and moved at half speed, and that was called squeezing. And if it happened, you were done for, unless your character was so ridiculous that you could deal with a -4 penalty and be like, oh, yeah, I'm still 30 better than all of them.
How many
I just
animal
not
companions?
34 better than all of them.
How many animal companions took narrow frame for this reason?
It depends on how many people had that player companion.
Yep.
Everyone who did had at least 5 animal companions who took it. So in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it's no big deal if you have to go through a tight space. It's difficult terrain. Like, maybe at the worst, you might put some other penalties on it. If it's so small that you have to, like, through it, then it's a squeeze. And that usually takes a minute, which means it's not a combat skill, usually. But if, as the GM, you could set up a situation where there are areas that require squeezing to show off the legendary acrobatics quick squeeze character in your party's ability to just, like, actually go through those as areas, or, like, a monster that squeezes through things like a gug or something.
That could be something that would allow the party an opportunity to get a tactical advantage, but maybe not all of them are going to be able to make it through that gap, so then they have to make that sort of decision.
Right.
Or maybe the person who has the legendary skill feat might be able to sneak in the back and steal something from the opponents.
I think it's technically a like a really low-level skill feat that at legendary advances to let you go at, like, your normal one round to move through that area. But regardless, it sets up a tactical situation where maybe, like, there's switches, but that your party's not supposed to be able to get to, but the legendary squeezing person, or someone who blows a high-level teleportation spell, can go kind of squeeze through and get to the switches, which are in a different room, like, during the fight, and, like, start controlling the traps, or something like that.
Yeah.
So those are the acrobatics skill actions. Now, could you have a skill feat that gives you more? Yes, but we're not going to go over all of those. There's just a lot. So let's talk a little bit about... we'll go over some. Like, for example, Recognize Spell is a universal skill feat that is pretty applicable.
Yeah.
So when we go into the next skill, Arcana, we can talk a little bit about that. But first, Arcana is the first skill that has the universal skill action Recall Knowledge. Now, it's a universal skill action because you can recall knowledge with any skill in the game. Now,
you're more likely to do it with certain skills.
Are you likely to recall knowledge with athletics? Probably not very likely to recall knowledge with athletics because, but you might. Like, we recall knowledge with athletics.
About, like, a certain maneuver.
Or, like, this is really heavy, and I know from my weightlifting that it's going to be tough to lift it. But you rarely are going to want to do that. But
if you're fighting a Herald of Kurgus, is a suggestion for you might recall.
You might.
Yeah.
You easily might. So, recall knowledge is typically used with the skills Arcana, Crafting, Lore, Medicine, Nature, Occultism, Religion, and Society. But you could use it with other skills. And it's used to spend an action and you find out some cool stuff. It's very useful in combat, and characters often forget to use it. So as the GM, you might want to remind them to do it. And remember that in Pathfinder First Edition, there was a lot of sort of back and forth at tables with recalling knowledge because it was a free action. So 6 people would try to do it, and some cases they would succeed by 60. I've been guilty of it, and the GM has to give 14 facts or something like that.
And there's a note here, the GM may allow checks to recall knowledge using other skills, like assessing the skills of an acrobat using acrobatics, but if you're using a physical skill, the GM will most likely have you roll a mental ability score.
Typically intelligence.
Instead of the skill's normal ability.
That's
correct.
That's
worth mentioning as well.
That is what I meant when I was talking about athletics being a possibility. It is at the GM's discretion.
Exactly,
it would use int.
Yeah, we didn't mention we use int.
That's a good point. So, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there's not a case where someone's going to get 14 facts. And it also takes an action. So, remember that it might not take an action if they have a special skill feat for it. But remember that the PC has put a pretty significant investment into this. So, when you give the accurate knowledge on a success as the GM and the useful clue about the situation to the PC or the NPCs. They should recall knowledge too. Don't just give them all the information.
Yeah.
Make sure to give them a good, useful clue about the current situation. And that includes, generally, for a creature, you might want to give them, the top line that everybody knows about the creature and then, some other thing. And with a critical success, they gain additional information or context. And that means you can give them, if they had a critical success, it doesn't mean, this critical success, this is a troll. Trolls regenerate. Trolls are nasty creatures that live in the swamp. You can give them useful information. You don't try to count each piece of information.
Yeah, there's no
strictly like in Pathfinder First Edition where they might have had 14 pieces, so you had to ration them out.
Yeah, so success is a useful clue, and then critical success gives them something that is going to be very useful to them, and can give them multiple pieces of information certainly. But it's not the critical success doesn't mean sit there and read literally everything that could possibly be relevant in the stat block. But it does need to give them several pieces that are going to be really useful to them tactically. And I find as a GM, giving the pieces that you think are going to be most useful to the group. So, for example, if something has a resistance or weakness and to an element, and you have an alchemist in the party, so then they'll know exactly which types of bombs they should be using and things like that.
Oh yeah, alchemists are just sort of ready to trigger your deepest weakness at all times.
And if the PCs know exactly what they're going to be fighting in advance, they could roll this before the combat. So if it's they have done their research and learned they're going to be fighting zombies, then they could recall knowledge about zombies before they get into the combat.
To be honest, in War for the Crown, one of the biggest things that the alchemist character, despite what some people say about their alchemist characters, once he got past low levels and was not running out of stuff, he was really useful triggering all sorts of weaknesses. But one of the things he offered to their party is, despite having a very large party, he's the only one who consistently used recall knowledge checks, and he was constantly telling them about weird gimmicks that the monsters had that they would not have found out without the alchemist. Because the wizard was like, well, I could do that, but I'm instead going to quicken True Strike Disintegrate. Or disintegrate and quicken a giant chain lightning. So that led to the alchemist being the person who was always telling everybody everything.
So a few questions here. Do you recommend GMs lower the DC for specific lore checks? Should null lore have a lower DC than society?
That is a good question. So the lore skill says that it typically has a lower DC when it's more specific. And it's supposed to be more specific than a basic skill. Now, Bardic lore is not more specific because it is the lore that covers all things in the game. And so it probably doesn't have a lower DC. But no lore, if you chose, for example, undead lore and vampire lore are both lores that you could possibly have from a background that gives them. Right? So if you have religion, that has 1 DC. But undead lore would have a lower DC for undead. And doesn't do the rest of religion. Vampire lore should have an even lower DC for vampires because it's only gonna know about that. That's
Yeah.
like literally the thing that you know with vampire lore. Also, keep in mind though that some people can roll lore checks untrained, and so because Pathfinder Society dedication or the general feat, and so you definitely want to keep in mind with how low that you give it that you might want to focus on people who are trained in the actual lore getting a really, really, really low one, because if you were like, oh, I'm -10 if you do lore of this guy's name,
Yeah.
and someone's like, oh, well, I can do lore of Grandmaster Torch untrained, so therefore I get it at -10, which is better than the one at my Legendary Society.
Yeah.
By 2, because that Legendary Society is +8.
So what you're saying is that you could have things where the DC is lower, but only if you're actually trained in the thing?
You might want to consider that if you're going to... Like, if someone actually took Grandmaster Torch lore and wanted to know about Grandmaster Torch, considering Warlock's example, I would be tempted to give them maybe even a -10 on some of the checks with Grandmaster Torch, because, like, their background was you train with Grandmaster Torch and know all of his secrets or something like that. But if you're just saying, I roll Grandmaster Torch lore untrained, I would probably say, like, there's a limit to how specific you can try to roll these lore things untrained to get the difficulties down.
Yeah.
But you have to be fair about it, and you have to think about it. And Rico points out Ancestral Longevity can be great for a lore, because it actually does make you trained. So Yusarian asks, what about a Magnamar lore? So we definitely allow a settlement's name and then a lore. In fact, probably the most powerful lore in the game is Absalom lore, because it is the name of a settlement, and is also, that settlement is enormous and can be your entire campaign. We do not allow name of a nation and then lore, as you can see in the lore chapter of the Pathfinder core rulebook. So you cannot do, for example, Andoran lore, but you can do Andoran history lore. Or
I think it depends upon the specific relevance to your campaign. Like how if you're going to do lore for an entire plane, that might be okay if that plane almost never shows up in your campaign. But if you're going to do a campaign that's set on another plane, like the Plane of Air, then you don't want Plane of Air lore.
It does specifically say that with the plane lore.
So
it's like you can't have material plane lore.
So I might suggest that if you were doing a campaign that is entirely set in Absalom, then you might consider narrowing Absalom lore down a little bit into some more subcategories. The rules don't specifically say that you have to do that, but I think that a natural extension of not having lore be like lore at this entire only location that we're in this entire time.
And similarly, if your entire campaign is set in Goka, maybe you can have Taldor lore, and it's not a problem in the same way that it is for War for the Crown, where Taldor lore knows every fact, right? Maybe you can even have Avestan lore, Avistani lore, where you know all about that weird continent of Avistan over there to the west/east if you go really far, whichever way you want to go, and it doesn't matter as much, because the lore should not be for lore this entire setting that you can roll, and once you have picked a lore that is actually a superset of society for your campaign, more or less, then you have picked a lore that is not right for your campaign. That said, I'm sure that people are going to allow Absalom lore in in Absalom campaigns and not do that. But you're right, Linda, and the rules in the core rulebook allude to it when they say that you shouldn't allow material plane lore, and if you're actually playing in Heaven, you shouldn't allow Heaven lore.
Yeah. But the core rulebook can't capture literally every nuance. But that's my opinion on making sure that lore fits with its thing. There was another question above about do you tell players what skill it is?
Oh yeah. So generally the players are taking the recall knowledge action. When they do, it says that the GM is rolling a secret check against a certain DC after you stop and think for a moment. So typically, I just roll the correct check. If they want to posit a weird different skill that I think fits, like if they want to say athletics for knowing about the Herald of Kyrgyz or whatever, then sure. But other than that, they've had to give me their modifiers anyway to roll a secret check, so I just roll it secretly with the correct modifier for what the thing actually is. So that way, if they have super high crafting and religion, and they see this weird corpse with tubes just sticking out of it, or whatever, or even not with that, let's say it was a carrion golem and not a flesh golem, I would just roll their crafting and say, well, based on your knowledge of both religion and crafting, this is a carrion golem, which is not an undead, it's a carrion golem.
So there's not like an extra step of the PCs possibly rolling the wrong skill and being like, oh, well, you tried nature and it wasn't nature, try again. It's not a guessing game. You get whatever the best modifier is for that situation.
Yes, I mean, it does, that's how I do it. It doesn't technically say that the GM rolls the correct skill. And it does sort of talk about the GM allowing you to roll it with other skills, so there can be some give or take where you ask to roll a skill, a different but related skill with the GM's permission. But the point is that since it's a secret check, and I'm on my player's side with this, they've spent an action to recall knowledge. If they have it, great. If they don't have the skill, I will roll the one that they do have, and if they roll a high enough check, be like, your religion tells you that this is not an undead. You can figure that much out at least. This is not something that's under your, it's not in your ballywick. Some people think the secret check is just like, is not in the player's favor, but GMs are there to help the players have fun. So a lot of what we want to use the secret check for is to make it more fun by giving them the best possible outcome, and also helping insulate them from meta knowledge as well.
And there's a question. I think the question on telling the players the skill is relevant because players may not want to roll a skill if they're bad at it.
Because they don't want to critically fail. So,
but that, I mean, I kind of feel like that's part of the risk of trying if you're not as well versed, because it's harder to critically fail.
So the player definitely is supposed to propose a skill.
Yeah.
I'll give them a better skill if they have it, but if they legitimately thought that they were supposed to be rolling religion or occultism, and it's actually crafting, and they do not have crafting, and they have +0 in crafting, and
then
they're going to critically fail, I'll roll their religion or occultism and be like,
tell them,
and even if it's not something as simple as a carrion golem, maybe it's like literally an elemental that's a fire elemental, and they just wanted to roll occultism, and that's just not the right skill for a fire elemental. I'll just roll occultism then, if all their other ones are really bad, and tell them, you have poured through your mind of all your obscure philosophies and ancient mysteries, and you can know one thing: a giant moving fire thing is not. There's more to the heavens and the earth than are dreamt of in your occult philosophy. It's not an occultism check.
So you can definitely have that where you.
If I think they're gonna critically fail on the correct skill, I won't roll it. If they just don't have it at all.
Yeah. So you can give them the fact that it's not the thing that they know about.
So yeah, I try to be as helpful to them as possible with what I decide to roll. Now, is it possible that that they couldn't have critically failed the occultism check to say it's not occultism, but they have only trained in the correct skill for elementals, and then they have a slightly higher chance of critically failing that than if I'd rolled the other one and just told them you don't know? Yes. I'll take that. As a GM, I will personally take that risk reward into account, and they might critically fail. And they know that they might critically fail.
And sometimes critical failures are amusing. Are amusing too, and they can be disproved.
And as Katrina says, if you entirely force the player to know what skill it is, it puts the burden on the player, meaning that a player who is metagaming or just knows from your description, oh yeah, that sounds like an ooze, but I happen to know it's actually a type of undead. I'll roll religion. Gets an advantage over a newer player whose character has way higher religion than them because they're playing the cleric, whereas that's just a fighter with religion, but their player knows that it's an undead. So I'm going to take that into account and just do the best thing possible for my players. You do not have to do that. The rules do not require it. that's just sort of where I'm at. On recall knowledge, it's all up to you.
Can we talk about repeated checks to learn additional information? One example in particular is the specifics of Golem anti-magic.
Repeated checks to learn additional information. Yes, that is a great point. That's where I was going to go once we go through these questions. So thank you for bringing it up. Let me give people some XP. We've been on this rabbit hole for a little while. So in Pathfinder's 2nd edition, you can keep going and learn more information. The DC jumps up a difficulty category each time. You keep going until you don't learn anything. Theoretically, that means that you can keep going, but except for that, you're really only allowed to keep going and get more successes if you didn't fail. That means if you critically failed, you can try to keep going, but when the GM rolls their secret check for you, they're not going to give you a success. But if you keep succeeding or critically succeeding, you can keep rolling checks.
So that way,
and that is a way to get more information than just the initial context and the additional context. But again, this is still not a reason to keep the most useful information away from the first check and the critical success on the first check, because succeeding at 2 checks in a row where the second one's a little harder gets unlikely, and succeeding at the third one is very unlikely. So when we're talking about Golem anti-magic on a Golem, like, I might say that, like, this is a Golem, a Clay Golem, and let's say this is a Clay Golem. They are known for being pretty anti-magical and immune to most magic, but not all, and needing some adamantine to attack them, right? And then maybe the critical success is you tell them, yes, they're the element that you want to use on this Golem is X. And that critical success information is also what you can give them on a success on the second roll.
Yeah. And there's a mention you can use different skills too. Some monsters use more than one skill.
Yep. And what I often do when people use different skills is give them something that's focused on a little bit of a different element of that monster. So when somebody is rolling a religion check on a creature, I'll tell them more about the theological aspects of it. So, for example, we talked about elementals and how occultism wouldn't apply. Religion isn't usually the right DC, or the right skill to identify an elemental, but there are, like, people who worship the elemental lords. So if you did, I would definitely talk about, if you're talking about elemental lord worship and you try to do a recall knowledge on a fire elemental, you could definitely, like, in the sacred texts of Imeri, fire elementals often appear as major figures that are in support of her, and they're obviously on fire based on some of these religious texts, but you can see that right in front of you, and their special abilities, unfortunately, are not really covered in there, but you do know that they are very connected to this evil elemental lord, as well as Atreya, who is a good imprisoned fire elemental lord or something like that. So you can know a different aspect of it. When it's actually a skill that usually is used to identify it, and there's more than one, I'll give them just sort of something that feels like that tradition. Because if you look at the 4 traditions of magic, Arcane is sort of the one that scientifically-ish study magic and the way it has effects. And Primal is which is the other one that normally identifies elementals, is more about sort of a instinctual faith in the natural world and physical matter. So you would have a different take on them. And Amos Thoreau says you could get the broad information on the category plus an info specific to that creature. So slaver demon, you would know that demons are weak to good and cold iron, but you might know about its enslaved soul because that's very specific to the slaver demon. That's a good suggestion, Amos Thoreau. I like that. And you might also know all demons have some kind of sin-related ability, and then know it's called the slaver demon because it enslaves your soul.
And that's a good presentation too, because that helps players over time learn what those abilities are, and their characters become more familiar with it. So it's like a demon. Oh, it's a demon. Then this.
I'm very much on board with that, and I think that telling you the thing that makes it a namesake, or that adventurers would talk about, like with trolls. If you're not giving them regeneration on the initial check, I feel like you've sort of missed the memo on what they should have, if that's hidden for a later time. Or for Hydras, if you did not give them something about their heads and the whole head severing situation.
Excuse me, Mark. I would like to talk about if you have a pet Hydra and what's best for Hydra nail care.
Okay, but maybe if you used Hydra nail care lore.
How low would the DC be on Hydra nail care lore?
Pretty low, but then it wouldn't really be useful. Alright, so there are other checks that are on Arcana other than Recall Knowledge, but it was very important to go over the multiple checks thing. Thank you, whoever asked that in chat. And Rico says, I like to have monsters use their Arcanic ability if they're not particularly advantageous because it helps make them feel different. Yep. So Arcana can also decipher writing. Don't do that in combat. If you have really quick deciphering and the writing is like a secret message that will like set off a trap or do a magic spell, maybe. You can identify magic. You might need to do that in combat if you have quick identify and like there's obviously a powerful staff sitting there that you could blast someone with, but again, the GM's going to need to set those up.
I do want to talk a little bit about the NPCs using, or the GM's characters using Recall Knowledge on PCs. That would generally fall under society to know what kinds of shenanigans the PCs are up to, right?
Yep.
Or it could be
or
religion,
like,
if for a cleric who's a prominent religious figure.
Or Arcana for an arcane scholar, or Pathfinder Society lore if they're members of the Pathfinder Society.
Or like crafting for like a prominent alchemist or crafter. So you can definitely have your NPCs roll to know something about the PCs, and the more powerful and prominent the PCs get, and the more regular their tactics are, the more likely that NPCs might be able to identify and recognize them and know what they do.
Pathfinder Society lore says this is the person who went to outer space and saved a air elemental lord and went back to the past and talked to dwarves and also stopped Tarbafon's armies and also all these other things. But we've never heard of them and we don't know any of their tactics.
Yep. Well, and I think that kind of thing also helps encourage players to shake up their approaches. If you have a wizard that's always going around fireballing literally everything, then enemies who've heard of that wizard might want to use some tactics that go well against fireballs. Yep.
So if you're learning a spell during a combat, I don't know what is happening, but why are you doing this?
Because you're using it to distract the wizard.
Yeah, but that could be like casting a ritual and having a combat to distract the wizard. That could be cool, okay? Because it's like the ritual isn't gonna go off or not. But if they're literally just trying to learn a spell and you're doing a combat to distract them, that's like, it's not even high enough stakes that it's interesting. It just feels really annoying.
No, I'm talking about one of your characters, and as long as they continue to successfully learn the spell, then the enemy wizard will be so captivated by the fact that they're learning a spell that it's actually a hard shutdown of the enemy wizard. Yes, I got skeptical face.
And then there's also Borrow an Arcane Spell, which...
What weakness? Learn a spell 30.
Yeah.
Let me repair my shield to distract
Every
them.
round that you learn a spell, when you're fighting against the spell Ignoramus, it takes 30 damage automatically as you continue the activity.
What if they're a swashbuckler doing that ability where they show the enemy how it's done? Oh, you think you can cast a spell? Let me learn it real quick to show how much better off.
Oh, you mean James's character from Band of Bravos, the celebrity?
I won't say never because there's a lot of fantastic creativity.
Now we need the spell Ignoramus, a creature that takes 30 damage if you are in the middle on your turn when you're using the activity learn a spell.
Yes.
The only way we can defeat it is if we all start learning a spell.
Ignorance demon. If a creature learns something in their presence, they receive 3d6 mental damage.
That would just be too dangerous for that demon. It will die, Elf Tarot, because someone recalls knowledge and says, "Hey guys, this demon receives 3d6 mental damage if you learn something," and then the whole party learns that, and it just suddenly piles on the mental damage.
Yes, yes. See, there's approval of me turning your ridiculous hypotheticals back on you.
I see.
Making you make this speechless face.
Also, there is a skill feat that's worth talking about, Recognize Spell, which is a reaction that lets you recognize spells. Always useful. Keep in mind that you can still already recognize spells that you have currently prepared or in your repertoire without Recognize Spell. So that's handy. But if you have it, you can recognize spells that are not those spells. Let's move on to Athletics, which is the place where Linda wanted to start because it has so many skills for combat. So, Athletics has a lot of skills. It is the only skill for Strength, and is a very good skill. As long as Strength continues to be the only skill that can be used for Athletics, this is one of Strength's big feathers in its cap. So, Athletics also is reminding me that there is an Escape basic action that technically could use Acrobatics, Athletics, or your Unarmed Attack. So it's not necessarily a skill, but it is another one of those that fit in the Acrobatics tent of, you know, if you need to use this. And Escape is for if you are trapped, then you use Escape to not be trapped again. Alright, so then let's move down to Athletic skills. So we've got Athletic skill actions. We've got Climb. So it's pretty straightforward. If you are not a creature with an automatic climb speed, you can still use Climb to try to move at a certain amount of speed, which is not ridiculously fast, but it's alright. And you become flat-footed while you're doing that. That is a skill for combat. It typically comes up when you create like sort of interesting environmental areas that the PCs are going to have to climb around to get maybe to a higher up level, or there might be a ladder, but the NPCs like kicked down or got rid of.
And as a player
or
too,
pulled up
considering creating these sorts of circumstances by dropping a ladder, dropping a rope, you know, grappling across an area, things like that to create opportunities for this. And it's assurance and athletics, yeah, it's super useful. There was another recall knowledge question I see here for hazards. Do you need to recall knowledge successfully to know what skills can be used to disable a hazard?
It doesn't say in the hazard that you necessarily do, but you do need to detect the hazard. And if you do, then it doesn't say that you need to recall knowledge to find out more information about it. So you might intuit that they, like, the person who detected it and they had a good enough skill and the correct skill to notice it was able to vaguely tell, oh, this is mechanical, so I can probably disable it.
And the second one about using the 2-action disable device action no matter what skill is being used, that sounds like something that would be more of a top-level clarification.
That sounds like an erratum.
From an official source.
Yep.
In a Pathfinder Society scenarios, we've started putting like parentheses 1 action after some of the things to indicate the number of actions it's supposed to be, but...
Considering Warlock says Assurance Athletics is very good. It is very good.
And I don't know if that's going to be what the errata is
it's
or whatever.
Not.
That's just like what we've thrown together to make sure.
We're never going to give you an erratum that says it's only right if the team is so on the ball that they tell you how many actions it is, because people who are not you did not remember to do that.
Okay. Fair enough.
Okay. So, we've got, let me see, there's some people talking about, what views on athletics benefiting other players' movements, a shield, fighting, or champion using their shield as leverage to help a rogue or monk vault to higher ground. So sort of like roll an athletics check to try to lift someone up or give them a better angle on it. I'd probably allow that as like a bespoke action if somebody wanted to do it. You have to consider the overall like check and exactly how much it does, and maybe say like, we'll have it work this time right now when in the moment when you're saying it, but we'll think about it more overall if it changes the meta of the game, because sometimes moving people around can. It's not like Pathfinder First Edition where moving someone even a tiny bit could just suddenly change their damage from like 20 to like 952.
Yeah.
But it is a situation where it's something you want to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see, what else do we have here?
And there's a comment here: when in doubt, aid.
Hey, aid is always good.
Mm-hmm.
Aid can definitely help out. So force open, that's one you might have to use in combat. It's where you just kind of go like, ha! And you crash through a door, window, crowbar. Linda's face if I had moved my arm in just the wrong direction.
Hey now.
I mean, I wasn't trying to, but I'm glad I didn't hit you in the face.
You were far enough. You were far enough from my face that like it didn't look like you were gonna hit me in the face.
Well, sometimes it doesn't look like I'm gonna hit you in the face, and then I hit you in the face when I do like a ha motion. So, force open is a good one if you have just sort of jammed things that they need to break through during combat. Your PCs or the NPCs, like maybe you have a fight. Where there's like some kind of like cells and there's like despondent undead or other horrific creatures in the cells that are just like they've had no reason to try to break out because there's no mortal flesh to devour. But then when the PCs come into the room, they all start trying to break out and get into the fight, and that sort of the way that determines how many of them get out is how many of them can force it to open the door. To their cells, and the PCs have to try to figure out a way to block some of them in and blockade off the door so they don't get overwhelmed. You can use force open for sure. Yes, the time when I do that and run into Linda's face is usually when she's moving her head towards me.
Yeah. Well, I would say you're not that clumsy. I'm much more likely to be the one who accidentally bops or jabs you because I have really crummy peripheral vision. Like, if it's beyond my glasses, I'm not really sure. So the number of times I, like, bump into you or drop something...
Or if you're not looking and I'm doing that motion to try to gesture, you might be like, ooh, something's moving. I better move my head towards it to try to figure out what it is. I don't know what it is because it's in my peripheral vision.
That's not my thought process.
Oh, what is it?
I just don't notice it.
Then why are you laughing so much?
Because the parodical idea of me being like, oh, Mark is gesturing, let me smack my face.
No, it's like, oh, I figure you're turning to look to be able to see it.
Oh, yeah, no, like, I see to be able, that is
That's
actually
what
what
I'm
I do.
saying.
Okay. Yeah.
Why did you go right to, I want to smack your elbow into my head? I was going at, it's in peripheral vision. Something's moving in peripheral vision, I don't know what it is. Let me turn towards it.
Let me dive into it, yes.
Yeah. So the next one on the athletic skill actions is grapple. And we finally get to one of the ones that Linda wanted to do, the combat maneuvery one, so to speak. They're called that by many people because in Pathfinder 1st Edition, there were literally things called combat maneuvers that had, like, weird special rules, and grapple was one of them. In fact, in most RPGs, but not Pathfinder 2nd Edition, grappling winds up being one of the most complicated things in that RPG. Even if it's a simple RPG, for some reason, grapple tends to be really complicated. This grapple is not that bad. You just get your hand on something, and it gets grabbed, so it can't move until it breaks free. Remember that escape action. And if you get a critical success, oh boy, your opponent is restrained until the end of the next turn. We had a gymnast swashbuckler, and restrained is a horrific condition for something to get. Even if it's a boss that's higher level, they probably have a small chance that their first escape doesn't break out, which has happened with the gymnast swashbuckler in our playtest, in which case they are in big trouble on their next turn. And even if it does, they've lost their first attack, because escape is an attack action, so they're not going to get their full attack.
Hold on, we have a request from chat.
Oh? What is that?
Glump.
It's glump. I see. One action glump. Alright, we've fulfilled this request. We've transgressed the quest with finesse. Alright, so I have seen a thread on the forums about, like, why can't I get a 50% chance to restrain bosses? It's always pretty low to get a critical success, whereas in Pathfinder 1st Edition, the thread goes on to say I could pin and tie up an opponent of any level, like, pretty easily in a round or so, and they're just gone. And the answer is because that is, like, restrain is a really powerful ability with a huge incapacitation effect. In fact, the fact that grapple is not, despite the fact that restrain really mostly incapacitates you if you can't escape, like, it's on the edge of being an incapacitation effect because of its critical success condition. It's not because you have actions you can take one by one to try to get out, but, yeah. Tying things up and then moving on to the next thing in Pathfinder 1st Edition has traditionally been one of those top things that I've seen people actually complain about when they run into a person in PFS that's a player that does it, and it's like, there's this player, they just grapple and tie everything up, and so, because when you do a lot of damage, like, sometimes you're not going to kill the monster, and so your other friends can get the kill, and they'll feel like you're working together and adding the damage together, but since incapacitating them in Pathfinder 1st Edition via, like, a tie-up and grapple is not using the same track. It's like a previous episode I talked about with my telepath doing charisma damage. It's not cooperative.
Yeah. And even if you had, like, the spellcaster doing save or die spells, like, the spellcaster has some limit to how many save or dies they have. But the same issue would happen with ones who didn't necessarily have that limit when they were just going around disabling everything.
Yeah. So, and a bunch of people in the chat asked, did anyone really like the character who did that every round of combat? There is a thread you can find in the forums with a person who is engaging in very good faith and legitimately like that. And that's the style that they like, and that I think that is fine, but there's a reason that we removed it, and it was definitely for that. In any case, it's super powerful. So remember not to forget about it, because a lot of people go for the trip, which is also good, and we'll get to that. Because the success condition of trip is really powerful, and potentially like as good as grabbed without taking up your hand. But the critical success of grapple is so good that it's definitely worth considering, especially if you can tilt the odds even more in your favor. But even if you can't, skill checks can get pretty high compared to the enemy's save DC. By which I mean not like a effect DC, I mean their DC for their fortitude save. Particularly against like a rogue type person who doesn't have a good fort save.
Yeah.
So use grapple and use it with your NPCs if they have athletics.
Yeah. I mean, definitely see grappling a spellcaster as well who's causing some problems.
They're restrained now. Good luck. Like, they can try acrobatics to get out. I hope they've been pumping it. But or they're unarmed attack. But they're probably, like, not getting their next turn. Because if they're lucky, they'll skip on their first try and then cast a 2-action spell. If you have a reaction to that, they're not going to be pleased. Especially if you grab them and grab or restrain them and you have disruptive stance. There is no combination of things they can... I mean, I guess if you only grab them and they have disruptive stance... No. I just think there's no combination of thing they can do that is likely to work.
And there's a mention summons can grapple, trip, and shove as well.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes, definitely.
Can they do it that well? Not that well, but since... if you target a low DC, it's not that hard either. Alright, let's move to the next one. High jump. Yes, it's technically a 2-action activity, but there are ways to get it with 1 action with the skill feat, and even in a 2-action activity, sometimes you need to jump up. So, like the acrobatics actions, this is one that you'll know when you need to do it. It's when you need to jump up. Then there's also long jump, is the same except for when you need to jump across.
Yes.
What's the difficulty to jump over a 10-foot pit? Well, we're not going to get into that. Alright. So, shove. Another combat maneuver. Shove is the combat maneuver that's usually not that good, but sometimes it's the best by a lot.
Can I shove my friend?
So, it says you push an opponent away from you. Your friend is not an opponent, so you can't. So, shove lets you move opponents back from you 5, possibly 10 feet. It's better than it sounds, especially if you push your enemy out of reach. There's a shield feat that on a block can automatically shove, or attempt to shove, and the shield and whip fighter has a lot of fun against people who do not have as much reach as his whip, pushing people back 5 feet whenever he shield blocks, and they're then going to have to move back in if they want to attack, and he does it on their turn with his shield block, so it really can mess up their turn. If they're above a giant pit that falls into lava or something like that, then it's even better because you push them off a giant pit into lava.
And then they'd have to activate Grab an Edge to try
and we'll
not
have to
fall.
grab an edge to not fall into lava. Let's see. Backtracking a bit, would you allow a high jump for a rogue or monk to then use their reaction to grasp onto a huge creature? So, like, grab an edge onto a creature. So, you're going to have to decide if you allow grabbing an edge onto a creature. Technically, that's probably a grapple. If it was, like, so enormous that it was a set piece, that it was almost its own location, like a kaiju,
yeah,
then I would want to think of ways to treat it where you could do that and be walking on the kaiju and attack parts of the kaiju or something like that. So can wall-shaped creatures grapple, trip, or shove? What about the only attacks you can use text apply? That's probably a potential errata. It looks like Steven uses shove all the time and it's very good. It is very good. All of them are pretty good.
Can you grab an edgy character?
Can you grab an edgy character?
That seems like it'd be pretty overpowered to be able to grab an edgy character, because there's a lot of edgy characters.
There are a lot of edgelords out there. So swim. Like climb, this is the check that you make when you don't have a swim speed and you need to swim. You will know when you need to swim. It's when you're in the water. If you don't hold your breath, you might drown. If you don't swim, you might fall into the water.
Water definitely can make encounters more difficult and be a tactic for splitting up a map into discrete sections at low levels.
Yep. Last untrained athletics action is trip. You knock the opponent onto the ground. They're going to be flat-footed. They cannot move until they spend an action to stand up. That's one that makes it a little bit not as good as grapple, in the sense that grapple, they can't move until they spend an action to get up, and flat-footed as well. It's a little better than the grab condition in the fact that grabbed ends after one turn from grapple, and this does not. They will eventually have to stand up.
And this is also much more reflexy.
It targets a different DC, yes. That's definitely the case. And also, you can move away after tripping them, and you can't with grab, which can really mess them up and make them spend the majority of their turn getting into reach of you. But the benefit of grapple is that critical success of restrained is so much better than adding 1d6 bludgeoning damage. Which is the critical success of trip. Alright, then let's move to the athletics trained action. Disarm. This action, you basically win if you get a critical success against an opponent at a high enough level, because they are not going to be good at using whatever is their backup. Now, maybe they are, if they are like some clawed beast that just happens to have a weapon. But in a lot of circumstances, the NPCs do not have enough money or to have like
multiple magic weapons,
or to have a wrist wraps of to do extra damage with their punch.
Yeah. And
so you suddenly got rid of their major striking weapon. It's like game over. But that's on a critical success that you're gonna win. On a success, you only weaken your opponent's grip, which has the weakest effect out of all of the successes, because it basically makes it easier for other people to dogpile and disarm to try to get a critical success. You basically automatically critically aid anybody else who's doing a disarm, and then they take a penalty on reactions until their next turn, where they can get a.
That says to attacks with the item, yeah.
To any actions.
Yeah, you said reactions.
Sorry. Yeah, well, it's reactions because it's the timing on it is until the start of the next turn.
Yes.
So, and it's gonna be a reaction or a free action, because what else are they gonna do before the start of the next turn?
I see what you're saying.
So it definitely has the weakest effect on success, and that's because you're gambling for that critical success is even better than a restrain. Not against wizards, perhaps. Kitsune Warlock wonders if multiple successful disarms are cumulative on the circumstance bonus. That's an easy one, Kitsune Warlock. Nothing is ever cumulative, ever. Except for a few types of penalties that say that they are.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you're ever wondering if something is cumulative, it never is.
And for that reason, there shouldn't ever be a bonus that doesn't have a type.
It is actually not legally allowed.
Mm-hmm.
A penalty that doesn't have a type is allowed, but there is no such thing as a bonus that doesn't have a type.
Mm-hmm.
If you put that into your thing, it's wrong. Alright, so that's it for athletics. Let's move on to crafting.
We're an hour in and we've made it through A.
Hey, but A has like a lot of the big
It
deal.
does.
Because when we go to crafting,
Mm-hmm.
right, we're recall knowledge again, which we've already done.
Thanks for the sub, Steven.
Yeah, thanks for the subscription. So let's move on to earn income. So earn income is the way that you turn that skill and you turn it into monies. Everyone likes monies. So when you earn income, you roll you basically figure out what kind of task you can have based on what what settlement you're in, how popular you are. You might have gotten promotions
How are you earning
up to a
income
better
in
task.
combat, Mark?
You're not. So maybe you're fighting against the poverty demon, and it takes 30 damage. So let's skip earn income because of the fact that you can't do it in combat. Repair takes 10 minutes, unless you're Linda's fighter who has legendary quick repair, or
yes.
even master quick repair. You could do where she like went over to that shield and whip fighter I was talking about and just using improvised lack of tools for the -2 penalties. So just like with her own
Fist.
like that I think you had weapons out. So with like the
did.
side of her axe,
Right.
she just sort of like improvised it as a tool and just sort of smacked into his shield.
No, that's right. It was the side of
with
my
a
axe
big
because I had my
penalty.
own shield out that I had
Yeah,
to repair as well.
with a big penalty and just repaired it as one action because she was legendary and gave it back all of its hit points. In the one fight where when the one fight ever where one of the shields of one of the people was falling low because oh my gosh, she blocked so many
The question
times.
is, but what if you're a gladiator? That doesn't mean that you can't earn income from combat, but it does mean that you wouldn't be rolling
the
earn income check
in
is
the
one of your
combat.
actions in combat.
Now, if you're a gladiator and you want to run a gladiator campaign and actually run the combats that the gladiator does and maybe like give bonuses on the earned income based on how well he did at the fights, you absolutely can do that. But like Linda said, you'd roll the earn income during the downtime phase. It's a downtime skill. That doesn't mean that like repair is an exploration skill. It doesn't mean you can't roll it in combat if you have a skill feat that slows it down. It just means you can't if you don't because it takes 10 minutes.
Or that speeds it up, but yeah.
Yep. Oh yeah. Sorry, that's what I meant. Speeds it up, slows it down. Same thing. No, it's not. So craft is like earn income, except for that you make an item instead of money, and you can always make an item of your highest level if you feel like it. It's also downtime. Then there's identifying alchemy. It's like identifying magic, but with alchemy. Alright. Let's move on to deception.
There's a comment, gladiators used to wear advertisements even in ancient Rome.
I mean, that makes sense.
You know, Kitsune, some things never really change.
So, deception has some uses in combat. First of all, you can create a diversion. Be like, look over there, I'm gonna hide. We'll get into hiding in combat in stealth. I'm sure that won't take any time. Then there's impersonate, which you would need a quick disguise to do in combat, but I guess you could create a distraction and then quickly impersonate someone. So it's like, look over there, it's Iomade. And then you impersonate Iomade and they look back and it's like, actually, Iomade was over here. That person who told you about Iomade is gone.
But Iomade, isn't honesty part of your creed? Why
yes,
are you
that's
lying?
how you know I'm telling the truth.
Troll Iomade. Trollomade.
Trollomade. There's also lie, which you can kind of do.
But not if you're Iomade.
I mean, probably not. But if you're not Iomade, you might need to lie to someone. For instance, if you are trying to trick them into doing something dumb in combat, like you tell them, "Oh, well, good thing we have up resist energy against fire on everyone in the party." I mean, they probably aren't going to listen to you even if they believe your lie, but maybe they will. There are other
Did
things
you get?
can do.
Oh, crud! These people are supposed to be Masters of Fire. Did you get our resist energies up in advance? Yes. Don't worry, I did.
And then the train deception action, which is also a combat action and a favorite of fencers everywhere, is feint, where you throw your enemy's defenses off, making them flat-footed against your attacks for some amount of time.
And feinting can totally be worth it.
Yep. And hey, the playtest Swashbuckler had a way to use feinting to get different kinds of penalties if you've already got flat-footed.
And I think it's worth noting that that in terms of helping your allies, that making someone flat-footed is different from aiding them. So if you're all trying to pile on to things, since aids don't stack, that's a way to.
So technically, deception only puts it down for yourself if you don't have something else, like the very good scoundrel ability from the rogue that makes it apply to everybody.
Yes, that's a good point.
But yes, it flat-footed is just overall good, and you can use, for instance, grab or trip plus aid on that true strike to disintegrate, and suddenly the enemy is in very big trouble because they're flat-footed. You can give the bonus, that circumstance bonus onto the true strike disintegrate. It's not good. It's not looking good for them. So let's talk about diplomacy. Gathering information takes a long time. You can't do it in combat. Making an impression also takes a long time. You can't do it in combat. Requesting is fast, but people who are fighting you will not listen to you unless you have that legendary skill feat where they will listen to you. But if you do have that legendary skill feat, you might be able to negotiate a truce, which is pretty cool. Just with great power comes great responsibility. If your party loves it when you negotiate truces, then that's great. As the GM, if everyone loves it, you should make the person who spent that legendary skill feat get to negotiate truces a lot. But if only that person wants to negotiate truces and everyone else wants to actually fight, then GM, you should look carefully at that legendary skill feat, legendary negotiator, and see that sometimes there's no way to reconcile, or they have buffs up and they don't want them to go down, and don't let them negotiate every time so that other people get a chance to fight.
Go ahead and ask the question, Steven here, and we will answer it when we reach a good point between.
We will answer it if it's not an erotic question.
Well, our answer may be it's an erotic question. That's
or it's a adjudication question, for example.
So that's diplomacy.
That's diplomacy.
Intimidation. Also super useful.
Very, very useful. You can't coerce someone during a combat. You need to converse with them.
But you can demoralize them.
Demoralize them, one of the best. But it also has a 10-minute cooldown, thanks to Linda using too many demoralize. Actually, it's two things that changed that, to be fair, needed to change from the playtest. And but Jason was very convinced that they needed to be changed, whereas before he was not. When Linda used Demoralize, which used to, on a critical success, send things running away.
Yes.
Always without the skill feat, whatever level they were, and not make them temporarily immune.
Well, Demoralize seems super powerful, so when I was
Linda
playing
just used it
thing, I just
Barbarian,
spammed Demoralize, because it was ridiculous.
She made half the fight run away, and when it came back, 2 rounds later, she made it run away again, because she could get critical successes all the time. That's the thing. All of these skills and attack rolls, they're on roughly the same scale, but skills are ones that you can always get up to legendary. The rest of your stats, not necessarily. And you could have picked it in your top ability score, at least close. So you're going to have the highest chance of critical succeeding on a skill that you do of anything. And that, especially if you're going up against their weak DC. And so you're going to frighten them with Demoralize. It's good. Use it against PCs if your monsters have Intimidation. It gives them a penalty to everything. It's good for NPCs. It's good for PCs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that was the perfect
and Rico
test
says
round,
even with those 2 checks on its power, Demoralize is still great. Yes, it is.
That was the because that was when Jason was running that part of.
He was running the
you're gonna lose eventually test from the playtest, and it was let me just scare off everything.
Yep, absolutely. Let's see. What else is going on over here? People are talking about hobgoblins with their agonizing rebuke. And battle cry being awesome is very good. Also, there's always scared to death, but that's technically not a demoralize, but it is very funny since they might die. So intimidation is great. The debuff from frightened from intimidation is absolutely a status penalty. So you can make someone frightened and flat-footed and assist your ally and then do a true strike disintegrate on them. And all of that will all quickly add up into a bad time. And all of that stuff except the Wizard's True Strike disintegrate at the end is just using skills to do it. Well, I guess the aid technically is an attack roll because we use the attack roll version of aid. Let's see.
PC creates a trap, trip a monster, and then use a reaction to re-trip it over again. So asking, is there a way out of the monk just re-trips the creature every time they stand up?
In general, if I recall correctly, in general, there's several ways around it because the trigger has to be very, very specifically written to actually stop them from standing up, because usually the reaction would interrupt the action to stand up, and so therefore they would then actually still stand up anyway. Secondly, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, even if someone created a reaction, and let's say you were playing a game and you had a fan reaction that was called that thing I wanted to do with 3.5 trip block, and it said trigger, someone is trying to stand up. Effect, you let them stand up. Then after they stand up, you trip them. This specifically definitely happens after they stood up to give them a trip block. In that case, they still can just stand up again.
Yes. Because
they have multiple actions. So there are at least some ways around it.
And Kitsune's asking, could you ready an action when any non-prone enemy does anything within my reach trip them?
I mean, you could ready an action like when there is a non-prone enemy within my reach trip them. You could.
I mean, that's certainly more actions than just tripping them.
If I trip you, and then spend my other 2 actions to ready, which, remember, keeps my multiple attack penalty from the first trip, and then my whole turn, and then you spend 1 action to stand up, and that ready was the thing Kitsune said, when there's a non-prone enemy in my reach, I will trip them. And then I succeed at the trip with the -5 penalty, and trip you again, and then you stand up again, and now I have used my 3 actions to spend your two of your actions. It could be worth it against a boss, but how did you succeed at both the trip and the trip at a -5 against the boss? You were pretty lucky.
And then there's a question, do reactions keep map?
Let's see. Attack of opportunity is specifically a strike. Oh, people are saying they're doing attack of opportunity to do a flurry of maneuvers. You cannot. If something says you could take a strike, that doesn't mean you can take a activity that does a strike. There's a rule that says that they are not activities that contain an action within them are not that action in terms of a. So, for instance, you could not use haste and then use that quickened action to do a flurry with strikes in it, because it specifically says you take the strike action. You do not take something that has the strike action.
Yeah, but there's a question about multiple attack penalty applying off your turn.
Oh, multiple attack penalty applies to ready in particular. The latest 3. Check ready. It is a special exception. Because of ready cheesing. It's a special rule in the ready reaction. The ready action, which creates a reaction that has that special rule on it. Hooray. AOO doesn't. Yes, Rico's got it. Indignity asks, does multiple attack penalty apply to aid checks that are aiding an attack? Well, it doesn't have the same rules as ready, so it generally would not. Rico and Kitsune say it's very clever and has many clever things like that. I think most of the design team would say that we find it a little inelegant that we had to do that, just mostly because there's so many cheesy things you can do with ready, and we wish that it was not an exception. But yeah, we had to do that. Alright.
So lore is pretty much going to be
lore
recall
is just
knowledge,
recall
which we
knowledge. You're
talked
not going
about
to earn
already.
income. And we already talked about the fact that you can have lore of a specific plane other than material plane or the one the game is set, lore of a specific settlement, and so on.
And some suggestions
Just try to
maybe how
make sure
do that
you
for
don't
your-
allow a lore in your game that is like lore of everything or that is bigger than a skill in your game. And that might mean that the suggested ones don't work in your game because maybe stabling lore, maybe everything takes place in stables and your whole campaign is about it. And stabling lore is just more important than the society skill entirely because it also helps you with horses. And there's no society check you would ever make except in a stable. I don't know. That's really unlikely. Let's move on to medicine.
More likely it might be like academia lore for a campaign that's set in a...
Yeah, even then though, I'm not sure if it will actually be above society at a campaign that's set at a university.
Where literally everyone's only from the university.
Like,
Like
if you allowed academia lore to also be like, this is a university that studies in Usulov, that studies crafting and magic and all these things, so I can know about every professor's thesis and therefore know about arcana and crafting and all about the people there, then
Lore's
you're
always
getting into
going to
a
be a bit
problem.
of a judgment call because it's supposed to be that more narrow.
Elftro asks, would it be possible to ready an attack or trip, then attack or trip? I'm pretty sure that ready ends your turn, doesn't it? Let me see. I think that's another thing we had to do. Yes, your turn ends as soon as you take the action ready, Elftro. So, don't worry. That's another random thing we had to do for ready. No, Steven, you would be able to ready a flurry of blows. You absolutely could ready a flurry of blows. Then you've used ready. You spent 2 actions to ready a flurry of blows. But you can't attack of opportunity a flurry of blows. So, medicine. You can administer first aid to stabilize someone or stop bleeding, even if you don't know how to do that medicine thing. Also, if you're trained, you can treat disease, but it takes 8 hours, so not in combat. You could treat poison in combat to try to, like, quickly get some of the poison out or block it out from their body, and it gives them a pretty big bonus on their next save against the poison. Or, you know, you accidentally push the poison deeper into their bloodstream. Don't do that, folks. It's not a good choice.
Then you have treat wounds, which by default is an exploration, but battle medicine.
Battle medicine lets you not treat wounds, but heal the same amount of hit points as treat wounds.
Yes.
But it's such a big skill feat that we should talk about it. So you can do that. I'm sure people have asked, and we've said we'll be in the errata about all of whatever details probably showed up in the chat. Oh, they haven't. Great. But if they do, then that's the answer. So all of these are useful, but you know when you need them. If you're an NPC or a PC, if you need to stabilize someone with medicine, then you know that you do. And probably for an NPC, that means you're playing with allowing them to go into death and dying, which is only optional for ones who don't have like regeneration or healing or other abilities. So you might not need it that much. It's still worth noting if one of your NPCs has medicine and the PC is like a poisoner type person and it's constantly poisoning you, that you can do a treat poison if you want.
I'm guessing that what Steven just put there is the errata thing you were talking about? Something about timing?
I don't know if it is. I think it's more about like people saying like, what about my healer's tools?
Oh, I see. If you use Battle of Medicine check like 2 minutes ago and then use Battle Medicine right away, can't you?
If you use a medicine check 2 minutes ago and then use battle medicine right away. Oh, you mean treat wounds. Well, battle medicine is not treat wounds. There's a lot of reasons why it isn't. That's one of the reasons why. It's not treat wounds. It just heals the same amount as treat wounds. Also, it does not remove your wounded condition. Because it's not treat wounds. So, it has its own cooldown, which is usually more restrictive of a cooldown. Let's go into nature. We already did recall knowledge and identify magic and learn a spell. That very important combat skill. But what about...
Altero says Jason disagrees on that.
Jason disagrees on whether or not battle medicine is treat wounds. But it's definitely not. And Jason may have said that a while ago. I would be surprised if he said it recently. Oh, interesting. Whether treat wounds is affected by battle medicine. Now I'll have to check treat wounds. Battle medicine is definitely not affected by treat wounds. Treat wounds says that temporary immune to treat wounds for 1 hour. No, yeah, it would not. So, like, we all make mistakes. Jason makes very few of them because he knows the game very well. But that's an easy mistake to make when you're running it on a stream and not looking directly at the text. But I am looking directly at the text. And it says the target is temporarily immune to treat wounds actions for 1 hour. But not that they're temporarily immune to battle medicine actions.
And he also may have decided it works that way for his specific game. That's a good point. Because
he probably wouldn't do that without telling you
that he's doing that.
That he's doing that, because he does try to go by the standard rules. But that's, like, if not for the fact that I had recently looked that up for a different reason on a different question that people had asked, I might not have been able to tell you that if I had to do it right in the middle of a stream.
So I think that's medicine, though.
Yep. But I think this is an important lesson because Jason is incredibly knowledgeable and an incredibly skilled GM. Even he makes mistakes in games. It's okay if you make mistakes in games, too.
Everybody does.
You need to know that everybody makes mistakes. Like the Sesame Street song. So, let's move on to nature. Nature, you can command an animal. Well, you have some kind of animal around here. Say a horse, and you spend your action to make it do a thing.
What if they're my companion?
Then they're a minion. In that case, you spend an action, and they get 2 actions. Once per round. Oh, Rico also thinks Jason did it correctly, and Ultra misheard. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the animal can listen to you or not listen to you. This is another one where you know that you needed to use this because you have an animal and you want to command it. Keep in mind with NPCs, it's usually better and easier if you don't have them have, like, a trained tiger that they're commanding with their actions, but instead just set the encounter up with a difficulty based on a trainer and a tiger being separate creatures and just have them fight separately. Because if you have a trainer who's like level 1 with a trained tiger that really listens to them, that's like much higher level, and you're like, well, the difficulty is only the trainer because they're spending their actions on the tiger, it's not really accurate. So it can wind up being like weaker or stronger than you think. So you might as well just have them fight the trainer and the tiger and not use commanded animal.
So if I'm coming across an NPC and the NPC has a companion creature of some kind, can I use a companion tiger? Can I use commanded animal to try to get their companion tiger to betray them?
Well, so it only works. It specifically says you automatically fail if the animal is hostile or unfriendly to you. So. First of all, that's even if it's not an animal companion. If the animal is like, yeah, this weird Linda's weird like lich queen is trying to command me, but no. Second of all, if it's a minion, then no luck. It's a minion. You specifically command your minion. Minions. But yeah, the Sesame Street song, Katrina, is not saying the song is a mistake. There's a song that Big Bird sings. It's like, everyone makes mistakes.
Yes, you can. Everyone makes mistakes. If you Google it, the first hit is Sesame Street. Everyone makes mistakes.
Yes.
It's a song.
Oh yes, they do. Occultism literally does not have any other uses than the ones we've already talked about. Performance has a usable in combat, but you probably won't unless you have like a distracting performance or fascinating performance skill feat or something like that. Perform. You do a quick song or dance or tell a joke, and you might impress the observers. In fact, I guess, like, if you don't have those skill feats, but you're like, oh, well, we may die against these vampires, but I critically succeeded in my perform. It says they're likely to share stories of my ability.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, we killed some adventurers yesterday, but that bard, not only did they have great tasting blood, but, like, that song that the bard was singing as she was dying was so remarkable.
Question, do you make your players actually sing or tell a joke? No, he does not.
I do not.
I would not be happy if he made our players generally have to sing.
I mean, if you have a player who's a professional comedian or singer who wants to sing or tell a joke, I guess they can.
And you can also do this as sort of the the semi-in character thing where it's like the player says, well, I'm going to make a joke about something.
Yep. It's also worth noting, now that I'm thinking about it, that for diplomacy, it's been revealed at PaizoCon that there is a skill feat called Bon mot in the diplomacy skill feat that lets you sort of go back and forth with some witty banter. So
I think I saw another question up there.
There was another question up there.
The scroll is not great. Well, something about summon creatures, and whether or not.
It was just a statement.
A statement. I see.
It was a statement. That's right. What's here? You wouldn't make player break down or lift of 200 pounds if they want to open something.
That being said, like, if the players do actually get into it, then
yes,
there's certainly room to apply a circumstance bonus.
If a player wanted to do to try to do something and they should generally tell me what their tact or strategy on it. If it's not so straightforward that there is no strategy, it's like, oh, you want to break down this door? I might ask them, like, what are you doing exactly to break it down? They'd be like, I rush the door versus, like, I just heave and leverage on the door or something minor like that. But if there's multiple ways to go about it, I just want to know how they're doing it. Like, so it would matter, are they singing or are they telling a joke? It's a joke. Okay, maybe what kind of joke or what topic? So if it's a pun and the person hates puns, they'll be like, I hate puns. Or if the topic is, like, telling jokes making fun of Serenites in Taldor, but this person's actually a Serenite, then it might backfire. So, or maybe they're like, that's the best, yes, and you're making fun of Kadira or something. Yeah. So, I like to know generally what kind of thing they're doing so I can give them bonuses, if it makes sense. Stump Monkey actually tells the puns. So yeah, you can if you want. But I would just try to figure out what kind of thing you're doing. Religion, again, like occultism, does not have any new types of skill uses. Society has, one, it is a downtime, create forgery. Please don't create forgeries in combat.
And we already talked about decipher writing being something that you're very unlikely to do.
Create forgery. It's like Abadar's True Text monster. It's a book that attacks you, but if forgeries get created in its presence,
then it takes damage.
Oh, no. Alright. So, let's move on to stealth. But first, some XP. Stealth is probably where we're going to spend the majority of our remaining time that we spend. So, in stealth, the first action is conceal an object. That's something you might have to do in combat, but probably not, where you hide an object on your person so that people don't notice it. It's more likely that you'll do it when you're passing a checkpoint, or during some other sort of tense situation that's not a combat, but it's one action, so it is certainly fast enough to be done in combat. Let's see. We're talking about foxes.
Yep.
Cool. The next one...
We're talking about being friends to foxes.
The next ones are hide and sneak. These are the ones that are going to take a little bit of time, because they're both one action, they're both done in combat, and we tried really a lot to simplify and make it, like, actually work when you read it, because in first edition, there needed to be a blog, because technically, like, there were some weird situations where you suddenly became noticed immediately, when you really should not have been.
Mm-hmm.
And the blog helped out. It was like a special stealth blog. So, in second edition, when you hide, let's talk about, actually, before we talk about hide and sneak, let's talk about, like, the degrees of being noticed by someone, right? So, you're unnoticed if they don't even know you're there. But that's typically not the case in combat. And if it is the case, it's not going to be the case for long. So, the three conditions about, like, how well they know where you are that actually happen a lot of the time are observed, hidden, and undetected. Observed means that someone is using a precise sense. Think of it like vision for most typical ancestries. A sense that is capable of providing every last detail of exactly where they are and a wide variety of other information about the person that will allow you to easily attack them and get a lot of other similar cues. Anything that would have previously been called like a blind sight in Pathfinder First Edition is now also a precise sense, and it's possible to have hearing that's so precise that it does the same thing. If you are being noticed, or if you're being like directly observed by that precise sense, then you're observed. Hidden means that the creature knows your location but can't see you. So something that is hidden, typically you've either been able to figure out where it is based on an imprecise sense, that is, a sense that is not capable of fully observing, but is definitely capable of giving the location down to their 5-foot space. Or it could be just because, that's just generally what it is, and that could either be because it's dark, so you can't see them anyway, but you figured it out from hearing, or it could be because they hid behind a rock, or are generally using the hide action. So the hide action is an action where you stay in place, but usually generally using cover or some kind of concealment that you have that gives you a concealed condition. You get out of being observed from someone into being hidden, which is more advantageous for you. The final one of these three is undetected. That's when they don't even know where you are. They know you're around, possibly, although undetected is not necessarily actually exclusive with being unnoticed. Unnoticed is just sort of a separate thing where they don't even know you're there. But typically, assuming you've been noticed, which is gonna happen soon, undetected means they know that you're there at that point, and they just don't know where you are. You could be next to them, you could be all the way on the other side of the room, anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
To get from hidden to undetected, you have to sneak. You cannot go straight from observed to undetected. You just can't do that. And when you sneak, you move, and then they know where you started the move, so they have some sense, at least, that, like, well, if they know your movement speed, or they predict it's a normal person's movement speed, they can figure out, oh, you might be within a radius of where you hid, but they do not know where you are anymore, because you sneaked. And that's sort of how it goes with hide and sneak. And then, of course, you people can seek, which is not a skill action, it's a perception action, to try to peel away that undetected down to hidden, or even to observed on a critical success. Sort of take one step towards being able to find them. Hidden twig, that's right. Undetected, they have to do a seek action to even know where you are. If they critically succeed, they'll also see you right away. Mm-hmm. If they don't, they might need to take 2 seek actions to actually see you. Because basically the way seek goes is, since you had to spend 2 actions, they have to... So, yeah, success is going to make it hidden instead of undetected, or observed instead of hidden. Critical success goes straight to observed. Mm-hmm. Think of that as like when the guards make their seek check and they're like, I think I hear something over there. Mm-hmm. Versus, aha, it's you!
Yes.
So, those are 2 different situations. Do those have multiple penalties? No, hidden twig, they do not have the attack trait. Alright, so that was stealth. Mm-hmm. that actually didn't take that long.
Yeah.
Well, we must have simplified stealth well, I guess. Alright, survival. So, survival lets you subsist in the wild. I guess society let you subsist in maybe in the city, and I forgot to say it, but that's downtime. So, do not roll that in combat. Do not recommend.
Sense direction.
Sense direction also, like, probably don't want to do that in combat. It's once per day, and it's like not even. It's just sort of something while you're exploring to find your direction. So covering your tracks is an exploration activity that you do while you're moving throughout sort of travel speed. Also not in combat. And track, same thing. So survival is really the least combat-y out of everything. Finally, thievery. This is a skill that you usually don't use in combat, but
unless there's a hazard and you're disabling
but
something.
maybe you do, and when you do, you need it. So palming an object lets you sort of take an unattended object without being noticed. You can do that in combat. You just take it just unattended off of a table. Steal lets you take it off of someone who actually has the object. It's a little bit harder to do that, and if it's well secured, you take a massive penalty without the pickpocket feat. Plus, in combat, if the person is particularly wary, you just can't if it's well secured.
So you can't use steal to steal a weapon out of somebody's hand.
Even if you have pickpocket and you're a master, which says you can spend 2 actions to take something that's well secured, you still can't steal the weapon because it says that it's something that's secured like deep. I think like deep in their pockets or something like that.
You can't take stuff literally.
But not literally that they're grasping.
Yes.
Yep.
That would be exactly. That would be disarm.
Yep. Although there is a legendary thief skill feat that lets you steal like even the armor off their body. It's very slow. It's very unexpected. And considering what it says, could you steal an undrawn weapon or a material component pouch? Those are things. An undrawn weapon is one that you probably could, if you had that ability, take. Whereas a material component pouch, I don't know, because like somehow you're using it as part of the action of casting the spell, so it must be like pretty closely attended.
Yeah.
That one's trickier because I'm not sure how you actually use it. The material component pouch, I guess it's more like tools. They're worn at the very least, so tools are. So maybe you can, if you can still warn things, if you treat it like tools.
There's a question, can you disarm a shield?
Can you disarm a shield? Well, if we go back to the disarm action, it says that you can try to knock something out of an opponent's grasp.
But is a shield in their grasp, or is it strapped
to their arm? That's a good point. That's a good point.
Because I think that would get back to, like, how long does it take to equip the shield?
I mean...
And is it held in your hand versus strapped to your arm?
I'm pretty sure the shield just takes 1 action to remove, so... But it is probably... so, like, bucklers are usually, like, on the side of it, but... Other shields... but you mean, like, can you use the release action to let go of a shield? I actually can't remember this off the top of my head on shields. I think you might have to stow them, or you might not. Let's see in the shield rules. Full rules on shields. The character must be wielding a shield in one hand to make use of it. They're held in one hand. So, there you go. It's held in one hand.
But a buckler does not take of your hand.
That's right.
Yeah.
But it says it's held, and disarm says that you get rid of a held object. So, we've got it.
There's a question here. Can you track someone and turns visible rather than seek? I think that would be because that would take too long. Tracking
is very, very slow. If you need to... If you have the time to track them, you can. But... you usually won't have enough time to actually fully track them through. You could seek them, but they're never going to get better to you than hidden if they're invisible, because unless you have a sense that can observe them while they're invisible. So, let's see. disable a device. That's one that you might do, especially in combat with a complex hazard. Usually, you don't need that many successes to actually fully disable it, too. So it can be very effective, especially if multiple people in the party can take part together, or you know that the device only takes a certain amount. I've definitely seen combats where there's a combat thing to fight, and then the rogue is disabling like these 4 pillars that just she has to get up to it and disable it once, and then after they're each disabled, it stops this like wild hazard from like swinging it around and hitting people.
And then finally pick a lock.
Pick a lock. You probably don't have to do this, just like you probably don't have to force open, but
when
the
you
same
do,
times that you do, you have to do it. Maybe, in fact, the fight is until you can pick that lock, the other PCs have to hold off endless waves of guards.
Yes.
And locks often take multiple successes, so this is not as trivial of a fight as it sounds. Where it's, you might have to hold up the guards for multiple rounds while you're picking the lock. Like, go faster, come on! Get the thing open.
It's more complicated than that.
Like, you try picking a lock when we're being attacked by the guards. Alright. Amos Though says the track action does say in some cases you might track an encounter. In that case, a single action doesn't have the exploration trait. You might need to roll more often because you're in a tense situation. Oh, then there you go. I missed that when we were going through. You're absolutely right. So yeah, you probably could try to track them down. If they're in a place that leaves good enough footprints to follow without spending a lot of time looking for them, you could just sort of go along and follow their trail with the track skull. Good catch, Amos Thoreau. Alright. So, that is all the skill actions.
That's a good example of we can get things wrong, too.
Yep, that's right. Just because I answered it does not mean that I saw the line in there that said the thing. Alright.
So,
I was just going based off of what I had read, and I had not caught that line. Alright,
I think that's a pretty comprehensive
skills.
list of all the skills and how they're used in combat.
I know that, like, what the episode suggestion was hearing how you incorporate skill actions in encounters, including by NPCs. So, hopefully this has followed through on that episode suggestion by going through every action that you can possibly use in encounters.
Yes.
And with that, let's say bye to YouTube. Bye, YouTube. See you next time.
Bye!